Tonight, House Democrats held their first impeachment hearing. We're going to show you the highlights and discuss with a former federal prosecutor. Then, the shocking new report that describes the psychological trauma that the migrant kids are dealing with after they were separated from their own families. And then, Joe Biden leading in the polls, but Elizabeth Warren, she's drawing some huge crowds at her rallies. We're going to take a look at whether or not the enthusiasm gap could hurt Biden in the voting booth. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Now, the House Judiciary Committee held its first impeachment hearing today, and it was really more frustrating than productive. That is, former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski spent hour after hour stonewalling Democratic questioning.
Corey Lewandowski may have shown up to the hearing, but answering questions, that's another story.
Do you not have an independent recollection of whether you met with the president on that date?
Congressman, I'm just trying to find in the Mueller report where it states that.
He's filibustering.
The back and forth continuing for more than 5 minutes.
I simply ask you, is it correct that as reported in the Mueller report on June 19th, 2017, you met alone in the Oval Office with the president?
Could you read the exact language of the report, sir? I don't have it available to me.
I don't think I need to do that, and I have limited time. Did you meet alone with the president on that date?
Congressman, I'd like you to refresh my memory by providing a copy of the report so I can follow along.
Even though Lewandowski never worked in the White House, the former Trump campaign staffer abiding by the White House's claim his conversations with the president are protected from disclosure by long-settled principles protecting executive branch confidentiality interests. Supposed to be seated next to him, President Trump's former staff secretary Rob Porter and former Deputy Chief of Staff Rick Dearborn. On Monday, however, the White House claimed they were immune from compelled congressional testimony. Lewandowski, however, physically there.
Yes or no? Read the screen.
You're welcome to read it, Congresswoman.
You're welcome to be stalling, and I'm not going to stall.
But not offering any testimony, including those outlined in the Mueller report. The special counsel found Mr. Trump wanted Lewandowski to ask the Attorney General Jeff Sessions to curb the Russian probe. Mr. Trump's former campaign manager standing by the president, who in turn offered his own support, tweeting, "Such a beautiful opening statement by Corey Lewandowski. Thank you, Corey."
And legal problems of the president or his administration hardly limited to Washington. He's also fighting legal battles as Trump in New York. The DA in Manhattan, he subpoenaed 8 years of Trump tax returns going all the way back to 2011. Manhattan DA investigating whether or not Trump may have broken state law when he paid off Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about their alleged affair. If Trump wrote them off as a legal expense, that could in fact be criminal. Now, all of this, of course, coming from former Trump attorney and fixer Michael Cohen, who told Congress about the hush money payments back when. Manhattan DA Vance, he has sent subpoenas to Trump's accounting firm seeking federal and state returns for Trump personally as well as for the Trump organization. Joining us now to discuss all of this, former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. Joe, as always, thank you, my friend, for the time. And help me out here. How is it supposed to work? Because Congress has the power to subpoena. Does the president just get to say, yeah, you talk, and if Lewandowski doesn't feel like cooperating, he just basically doesn't have to? If you or I tried that, I got a feeling that we'd be cuffed and stuffed. How did today go down, and how is it supposed to work?
Richard, if you're into political drama and clownishness and showmanship, then this was a great time, right? A great spectacle. If you care about good governance and the way things were supposed to work, this was pretty horrifying, right? I mean, this breaks down the entire structure that we have, which is that the executive branch, led by the president, has tremendous power, but it's checked power. And who checks that? That's Congress. And Congress has the power to investigate and subpoena and call individuals and documents, and with a few rare exceptions, they're supposed to get what they want. When that system breaks down, wherever you come out, if you think this is a legitimate inquiry or if you think this is a big sham, either way, Congress has the right to do this. And by the president dragging his feet and making it as difficult as impossible, basically saying that it's all a sham, all a witch hunt, he's breaking down the system. And while people might cheer that right now if you're a Trump supporter, at the end of the day, this is not good for our system of government.
But, Joe, does the president have the authority to tell people don't cooperate? As we said before, Lewandowski, he never worked for this administration. He never had an official role. Since when does he get the claim privilege?
So as far as the term immunity, there's no such thing as blanket immunity from testifying before Congress, right? Like we said, there's a few privileges, as you pointed out. Now, executive privilege, there's not a simple handbook or a piece of paper that explains what that is. It's years and years of cases and precedents. But what it's supposed to stand for is that the president is supposed to be able to get honest, open advice from his or her advisors, and then should not have to disclose that, right? Now, when we say advisors, those are usually members of the executive branch or officials at the White House. To stretch that concept now to just anybody that the president talks to is really bringing it to the bounds of what I think it was ever intended to do. Now, I can conceive of a situation where a president might want to get advice from perhaps someone who's not paid. And maybe there should be an opportunity for a president to do that, someone who's not perhaps officially an employee, but to say basically that the president and candidate Trump, before he was president, should be able to get this blanket privilege about anything he ever said to Corey Lewandowski. It's really stretching it beyond what it was intended to do.
So then here comes the question, because this was going to be the first of many witnesses that would come forward. Who's the person who has to call balls and strikes? The president's not going to police himself, that much we know. Who decides what is privileged, what isn't? And if you're the Democrats and you have a Lewandowski who says, yeah, I'm not going to, you can ask anything you want, I'll choose what to answer here, and basically be an ass about it in the process, who gets to decide if there was contempt that occurred today?
Well, Richard, you're right. So the president and the Justice Department, they're not going to be a neutral arbiter here and decide who, basically balls and strikes, as you put it. Congress can hold people in contempt, but as we've seen in the past, there's not a lot of teeth to that, because guess what? When Congress holds someone in contempt, it goes back to the Justice Department to actually enforce that. So that's probably a dead avenue, right? I mean, it could have symbolic value, but we've seen Congress hold people in contempt recently. It doesn't do much. So ultimately, it goes to the judiciary, right? Our third branch of government. Thank goodness the judiciary is very competent. They will make sense of these struggles. The downside, it takes a long time. So while we may be really eager to hear what's going on here, it could take months, it could take years for the court to decide things like whether or not there was a legitimate assertion of executive privilege here this afternoon. In the meanwhile, Congress gets stonewalled, and we don't get to hear from the people who actually witnessed what went down here.
And this may be more political than legal, but if today was a preview of what we could expect going forward, Democrats may want to slow their roll in the talks of impeachment, et cetera, given the uncooperative witnesses. But again, a political calculation. All right. Now let's shift over to New York, and not to the Southern District, but instead this time to the DA's office, Cy Vance's office in New York. And they're trying to get their hands on 8 years of tax returns, both state and federal. And obviously it's under the auspices of trying to find out about those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and how they were basically recognized for tax purposes. But it's not limited to that, is it, Joe? Talk about what kind of things, if in fact the DA can get his hands on it, the kind of questions and also the kind of maybe revelations we could possibly see here that could open up Pandora's box.
Well, Richard, similar to the analysis when it comes to a congressional subpoena, prosecutors also have a lot of authority to issue subpoenas and demand documents. It's not unlimited. The issue that jumps out to me is if the argument is to tie the tax returns to the Michael Cohen campaign payments, the violations there, that could be difficult because those payments, to my recollection, occurred in 2016. So I don't know how you get 8 years of tax returns based on that. There's going to have to be a broader argument there about questions as to where the Trump family and the Trump organization gets its income and whether or not that impacts his ability to perform the office of the president, basically. Is he influenced? And I think that's got to be the argument. New York State's going to have to say, yeah, the campaign finance violations are serious, and we do want to get to the bottom of those. And I think that's probably a pretty strong argument. But to get so many years back, they're going to have to do a little better than that. My guess is they've thought through that, and they're ready to make that argument. But again, it will be a hard-fought battle in the courts, and it will not take a short amount of time.
Speaking of something that won't take a short amount of time, finally, the Southern District. We know that Mueller referred a whole bunch of his cases, whether it be the Southern District, Eastern District, and some other jurisdictions, that would survive, especially if his inquiry was cut short, as was threatened by the president numerous times. It's always been my belief, and tell me if I'm wrong, Joe, that that is potentially the greatest exposure for the president. It wasn't the Mueller report. It isn't even what the DA is working on in New York City, because it touches every tentacle of the Trump organization, from the Trump organization, the Trump Foundation, the personal returns of the president, and so many other applications, even the inauguration, and where it could go from there. The Southern District has always been known as the sovereign district. But this is a different Justice Department than anyone that I seem to remember. How much do you think that Barr could be putting his fingers on a scale? And for those of us very curious with what is going on in the Southern District, when do you think we'll hear about this? Would it be after the election next November, where the president potentially could be a private citizen without any protections? Or would this happen, do you think, before, if in fact they bring anything in terms of formal probes?
Richard, a couple of things there. First off, you're absolutely right. The Sovereign District of New York is fiercely independent, fiercely aggressive. They have some of the finest men and women prosecutors this country has to offer. So I think it would be very difficult for the Attorney General to weigh in and slow down or stop investigations going on in the Southern District of New York, because there's going to be a record of that, right? I mean, he can't just do that and then expect that no one will know about it. If there's investigations that he is stopping in its tracks or slowing down or side railing, then people will know. And so I think the Attorney General is a smart guy, and he's going to be very wary of interfering with that office, because he knows how much they value their independence. Now, as far as the timeline, that's anyone's guess. I agree with you. I always thought that what was going on in the SDNY was probably the most potentially damaging to this White House, because there's no parameters. They're super competent, and they're not guarded by any kind of four corners, kind of like Mueller was. Mueller basically stayed in his lane as we expected he would. SDNY has no lane. They can go anywhere they want. They can take as long as they want. And in my view, it might be better if they wait till after the election, because they won't be constrained by Main Justice here in Washington telling them what cases they can and can't bring. So while we're all anxious to know what they're doing there may actually be some value in them taking their time, doing it right, and perhaps addressing not President Trump, but private citizen Trump with whatever they find.
And again, remember, everyone, if the president were to lose next November, not only would he be a private citizen, just like Joe said, but also the statute of limitations wouldn't have lapsed against some of the potential charges here. So he'd have a whole big problem, and I think holding his breath for a pardon at that point would be unlikely. Again, a long ways off here, but an interesting, if not frustrating, day in D.C. Joseph, as always, I appreciate the help tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Always a pleasure.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we've spoken a lot about the politics surrounding the administration's family separation policy. Now, after the break, we're going to put a human face on it by showing the toll that it's taking on the children. A child psychologist joins us from Yale to explain.